Hare Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and in this video, I'm going to introduce you to the Sri Isopanisad. The Sri Isopanisad is one of the oldest philosophical commentaries upon the sacred texts of the Vedas. If you don't know about the Vedas are arguably some of the oldest religious texts in the world, and they are the mouth of the river from which pour the teachings of the yoga philosophy and the yoga tradition. And so we're going to take a look at the Sri Isopanisad today, and specifically because this Upanishad is called the Upanishad of the Lord. And this Upanishad is very famous within the Bhakti-Yoga tradition. So I'm excited to introduce you to it, and I'm going to hold up the copy. If you want to order a copy of this book and read along with as I go through this series, we're going to go through the whole Isopanisad. It's 18 verses. You can order it. Here is the copy that I'm holding right now. You can get it on Amazon. It's pretty easy. Just look up Sri Isopanisad. You can see how it's spelled on the screen. Written by, translated by, and a commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Now, this is the guru of my guru, Vaisheshika Dasa is my guru, and his guru was Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is the monk who brought Bhakti-Yoga to the United States during the 1960s and began the Hare Krishna movement in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which then spread all across the country. And you've probably seen pictures of them, from the 1960s. Things have changed a lot from the 1960s until now, especially after the death of Srila Prabhupada. He was a saint, a Bhakti-Yoga saint. And so he offers a translation and commentary upon the Sri Isopanisad, which I believe might have been the first in English. But at any rate, we're going to take a look at all 18 verses of this Isopanisad and give you some of the core, simple, sweet philosophy of Bhakti Yoga. So, as I mentioned, the Sri Isopanisad is one of many of the Upanishad texts. The Upanishads are the ancient philosophical summaries and commentaries upon the Vedas. There's kind of a stream of philosophical and scriptural tradition in yoga, starting with the Vedas, going to the Upanishads, down to the Vedanta Sutra, and then distilled even further in a scripture called the Srimad Bhagavatam. And at some point, I'll also be sharing lots of stuff from the Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as the Bhagavad Gita, another classic Bhakti scripture. But I thought we'd start with something really old school and sort of ancient. It's a really fun text. In fact, it's the first text that I studied of Bhakti Yoga when I began a private Bhakti Yoga apprenticeship in 2017. My teacher had me read this, and it really stuck with me. It really left an impression upon me. So I hope that you'll enjoy it. Now, in particular, the Sri Isopanisad is the Upanishad of the Lord. Isha means Lord. It can also refer to the soul, but Lord or God. So this is the Upanishad of the Lord. It was written in poetic verse, and it consists of 18 verses. And again, it's probably the most famous Upanishad in relationship to Bhakti Yoga, as far as I know. Here's the invocation verse that we're going to study today. This is the invocation for the entire text. It comes at the very beginning of the Sri Isopanisad, and it exposes some of the simplest, most beautiful philosophy that I've ever encountered in my life, and certainly some of the core teachings of Bhakti Yoga about the universe and the structure of reality. Here's what it says. The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete. And because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as a complete whole. Whatever is produced of the whole is also complete by itself. And because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. That's really beautiful. I'm going to read it again slowly and talk about each part. The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete. And because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as a complete whole. So the first thing we're getting is this idea that there's nothing that God lacks. God contains everything, is perfect and complete. So that's refreshing, first of all, because it's giving us a picture of God as a being that contains all opposites, that contains absolutely everything, and that somehow maintains and contains all of them in a complete and perfect manner. Also, it tells us that everything that God has ever created, and this is kind of hard to talk about because when we talk about creation, we're really talking about something in this sense that's outside of time. It's hard for us to conceptualize creation because then we think of something that has a beginning. But really, God's creations are all eternal, which means that they have no beginning. So that's a really hard thing to wrap our linear minds around. It's not something we easily understand. But nonetheless, all of God's eternal creations, all emanations from God, such as this phenomenal world, this universe, and all of the beings in it, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Think about that. So what that's saying is that God is perfectly complete and whole, and yet God has all manner of different creations, and they're all perfectly complete and whole. Whatever is produced of the whole is also complete by itself. And because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance, which is to say, God is never depleted. Gods may create and many, countless unfathomable universes and beings and energies may emanate from God, but God doesn't lose anything from this type of emanation, which is, again, defies our normal way of thinking about it as like if something's going to emanate from a source, like, for example, let's say that water is being whisked by the wind. The wind is picking up the water and spraying it onto the rocks. Well, eventually the water will run out if it keeps getting sprayed like that. But this is a kind of, you could say, a kind of spiritual source that even though there are droplets flying out from, it's never depleted. So these are beautiful poetic images that are giving us a sense of our source and also giving us this comforting idea that we are also complete and perfect because that's what we come from, that we're perfectly equipped as complete wholes, just like God. So this is the basic vision of Bhakti Yoga, but it leads to some really interesting, when we take this, we can arrive at a few really interesting conclusions based on this. So as we said, God is perfect and complete. God's creations are each whole and perfectly equipped as complete wholes. So what is this saying? Well, this is giving us a picture of a God or divine being that is both variegated and complete and whole at the exact same time. In Bhakti Yoga, there is a concept in the metaphysics of Bhakti Yoga that is used to explain this phenomenon, which is called acyuta-bhava. And it means simultaneous and inconceivable oneness and difference, or oneness and diversity. So in this verse, in the Sri Isopanisad verse, we have the basic same idea being presented, that God has created so many things. There are so many eternal creations of God. They're all without beginning and they're all without end. They're all perfectly complete and whole, as God is perfectly complete and whole. So in that sense, God is many and God is one. God features all sorts of diversity, and that diversity has its own completeness, its own perfection, and its own autonomy, just like God. And so in Bhakti, we say, if this is the case, then the ultimate reality is the loving interconnection and relationship between all of the parts and the whole. And this is the model for Bhakti Yoga. Relationship and love are the vehicles for God realization. We are, in some ways, as beings, as you've heard me probably say in some other videos, like sparks are to a fire. We're of the exact same nature of the fire. We're just like God. We're made in God's image. But we're also different. We're also distinct. And because we're distinct and complete and whole unto ourselves, that allows us to have a loving relationship with our source. there's a strange way also in which, of course, as emanations from God, we are dependent upon God, just like a spark is ultimately dependent upon the fire. And yet the spark is an autonomous agent. It's its own being. So in Bhakti-Yoga, we say that the purpose of Bhakti-Yoga is to link the soul with God through loving relationship in the same way that we want all the parts of a body to work together and to be as one, even though they're distinct. So that's the kind of the philosophical basis for Bhakti Yoga, is the idea that God has so many variegated energies and worlds and beings, and that each of them are completely unique, completely whole, and completely perfect. And the pinnacle of that perfection comes when all of creation, all of these divine emanations come into loving union or connection with their divine, complete, perfect source. So I know that that might be, that's some deep philosophy on a certain level, but that is all derived from this beautiful, simple invocation, which I'm going to read to you one last time. And just take it in on a deep level. And if you get a copy of the Sri Upanishad, a simple piece of advice would be to read it every single day, because by reading the mantra every day at the beginning of the day, there's a way in which you just start to see things differently. You start to see yourself as a divine being, and you start to see yourself in relationship to your source as the completely whole divine being from which you have emanated. And everything is actually like that. In fact, what we'll talk about as the Isopanisad goes on is that we suffer greatly when we don't live in conscious awareness of this fact about our being and this fact about our relationship to our divine original source. So actually, let me show you one more thing from this slide, which is pretty cool. So I have a picture of Krishna and Radha here, and I wanted to elaborate upon that a minute. I almost forgot. So Krishna is considered to be like the source, and Radha is basically, in some ways, I might be simplifying this a little bit, but Radha is essentially everything that exists as, in some ways, apart from God, but is ultimately, in Bhakti Yoga, related back to God through love. So God and creation, God and all of the manifest variegated parts of God are related back to God in love. And so that concept, you could say metaphysically, is represented in the relationship between Radha and Krishna. And it's not to say that Radha and Krishna are just personifications of a philosophy either. In Bhakti, which we'll see in time, we actually believe that this relationship between Radha and Krishna, although it is poetic, is real. That the relationship between the model relationship of love between the soul and God and Krishna is exemplified through Radha's love for Krishna. And there's a whole beautiful world of stories and teachings about that as well. And essentially, when we practice Bhakti Yoga, what we're aiming to do is become like Radha, become like the one who loves Krishna perfectly. So anyway, that's getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I just wanted to give you a picture of that. Okay, now I'm going to reread the invocation mantra, which I hope you'll listen to a few more times and really just take it in. And then again, I really recommend picking up this book, which you can get on Amazon very easily, and just reading along. Now, the purports, I will tell you that the purports come from the 1960s, and Srila Prabhupada, who is one of the acharyas in the Bhakti Yoga tradition that I come from, was like one of the fountainhead exemplary saintly leaders. His mood and his style is beautiful, but it's also, I always tell people, like, this was written basically back in the 1960s in a countercultural moment, and also coming from a man who grew up in, I think he was born in the late, like the 1890s, right? So you're stepping into a slightly different world but the commentaries are completely beautiful, and you'll get a lot from them. So it's a little bit there. You'll notice though that it's like not. It's a little bit culturally different. It's not written like something in 2020. So anyway, here's the invocation one last time. The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete. And because he's completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as a complete whole. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete by itself. And because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. So I hope you enjoyed this first part of our series on the Sri Upanishad. And if you have any questions, you can always feel free to email me, info@nightlightastrology.com. Hare Krishna.